The 70th edition of the Monaco Grand Prix was held on the streets of Monte Carlo in grand style last weekend, and it ended up being one more race where the dominancy of Red Bull was clearly challenged by Ferrari and McLaren. Since the beginning of the weekend, cars made contact with barriers as well as rival cars frequently in the narrow streets of Monaco, and some of these ended up as big accidents. The 2024 Monaco Grand Prix was full of incidents, and this is our race report as usual to discuss them in detail. Welcome back to Total F1, but before we proceed, hit the subscribe button and smash the bell icon for more exciting updates. Drivers hit the streets of Monte Carlo on Friday for the first time to familiarise themselves with the existing track conditions. It was not an easy task for the drivers to keep their challenges within the track limits. In FP1, drivers like Hülkenberg, Bottas and Albon had a little journey to the runoff area at turn number 1. They were able to rejoin the track without experiencing any damage. Most of the drivers explored the full track limits, slightly brushing the barriers on a number of occasions. At one moment, Zhou Guanyu slightly brushed the barrier at the exit of Saint-Devote, and he ended up losing the front left end plate of his Sauber Challenger. That dislodged part was trapped underneath the car of Charles Leclerc, who was driving behind him. Pierre Gasly had to box his car early in the session without taking part in it much, as a technical issue was detected in his car by his engineers. By using all of his experience in Monte Carlo, Lewis Hamilton was able to top the timesheet at the end of the session with a lap time of 1 minute and 12.169 seconds. Behind the 7-time world champion, Oscar Piastri and Hamilton's teammate, George Russell, were the fastest drivers of the session. From the start of FP2, Charles Leclerc started to unleash the full potential of his SF24, searching for options to reduce his lap time as much as possible. In one instance, he went off the road and entered the runoff area at turn 1 after failing to reduce the speed of his car to a necessary level. Anyhow, he set some fast laps throughout the session, hinting the presence of sufficient performance in his SF24 to record one more pole in his home Grand Prix. Max Verstappen, who had been tapping the barriers since FP1, continued that habit in FP2 after failing to adjust to the grip conditions of the Monaco streets. Further, he complained about an unexpected bouncing issue in his car, which reduced his performance. Not only Verstappen, but also a number of other drivers were tapping the barriers at different parts of the circuit, and some had to pit their cars in between their practice laps to check whether those cars were running without any damage. At the end of the session, Charles Leclerc appeared to be the fastest driver of the day, recording a lap time of 1 minute and 11.278 seconds. Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso were the second and third fastest drivers of the session, using tons of experience that they have on the streets of Monte Carlo. Most notably, Verstappen failed to break into the top 3 in this session too. On Saturday morning, drivers brought their cars to the track with the aim of making final adjustments to their setups prior to the qualifying session. Leclerc was the fastest driver of the session, topping the timesheets once again with much improved lap times in FP3. Both the Red Bull drivers appeared to be uncomfortable with their setups, even though Verstappen and Perez were able to push their cars to the 2nd and 5th spots of the timesheets in FP3. Compared to the previous 2 practice sessions, most of the drivers stayed away from the barriers after having a good understanding about the grip conditions of the circuit. However, Valtteri Bottas tapped the barriers at the swimming pool when there were only 13 minutes remaining in the session, damaging his front right suspension. That halted the session for a brief time period, as his Sauber Challenger had to be removed from the circuit. Hamilton was able to continue his good form at Monaco, completing the FP3 as the third fastest driver of the session, behind Leclerc and Verstappen. In Monaco, qualifying is much more important than anything else, as the position of the starting grid plays a considerable role in deciding the outcome of the race. In Q1, Lando Norris and Sergio Perez, who were 2 drivers from the top 2 teams, were trapped in the drop zone when there were only a few minutes remaining to end the session. Lando Norris was able to escape with a quick lap in the end, pushing Fernando Alonso into the drop zone. Sergio Perez also tried to replicate Norris, but failed in improving his lap time. That was a big blow to the game plans of the Red Bull team. That means Alonso, Sargent, and Perez were eliminated at the end of Q1 alongside with the two Sauber drivers Bottas and Zhou, who occupied the bottom spots. In Q2, Alpine drivers tried hard to set much better lap times, which were good enough to sit out of the drop zone, as none of them have qualified for Q3 in any of the previous rounds since the beginning of the 2024 season. However, Gasly was the only driver to escape, as Ocon was trapped in P11. He was eliminated alongside with Hülkenberg, Ricciardo, Stroll and Magnussen at the end of Q2. Then the real battle began, as everyone tried to reserve a higher spot in the starting grid to get an extra advantage in the race. Leclerc was able to top the timesheets in his first attempt, and McLaren drivers appeared to be giving a much better fight to the Monegasque driver. Carlos Sainz was the driver in the other Ferrari, who was able to break into the top 3 with a quick lap. However, his lap time was beaten by Verstappen, who was searching for a fast lap to push his RB20 to the pole, but Russell was able to improve his lap time to the 3rd fastest one of the session when there were only a few minutes left. Anyhow, within those last few minutes, a lot of things happened, as Ferrari and McLaren drivers were able to improve their lap times too, reserving the top spots of the starting grid. However, Verstappen had to give up his final flying lap after tapping a wall, and it resulted to drop him down to P6 in the starting grid. That means Charles Leclerc reserved the pole position of the Monaco Grand Prix for the 3rd time in his Formula 1 career, and he shared the front row of the starting grid with Oscar Piastri. Carlos Sainz was the 3rd fastest of the session, ahead of Lando Norris and George Russell. Verstappen was in the 6th spot, and his former rival, Lewis Hamilton, occupied the 7th spot behind him. The last 3 spots of the top 10 were occupied by Tsunoda, Albon and Gasly. However, after qualifying, it was found that the Haas team was using a rear wing which was not compliant with the current regulations, and both of their cars were disqualified. So, they had to start the race from the back of the grid for that reason. Charles Leclerc started the race as pole sitter, and he was hopeful in converting his pole position advantage into a victory after missing that opportunity in the previous 2 attempts. He was able to get a jump start by developing a considerable lead with the rest of the pack within a few seconds of the race. However, he was closely followed by Oscar Piastri, who started the race in 2nd spot. Sainz was able to hold the 3rd spot after resisting the close attack from the rival cars behind. However, he appeared to be struggling with some kind of issues in his car, as sparks started to shoot out. Suddenly, he had to stop his car after going straight to casino. Later, it was found that a little contact between Piastri and Sainz at Saint-Devote resulted in a puncture in Sainz's car. Meanwhile, in the back of the pack, a heavy collision took place involving 2 Haas cars and Perez. The session was immediately red flagged. According to the video footage, the collision was caused by Magnussen when trying to overtake the Red Bull. The contact between them resulted to push the Red Bull towards the barriers, increasing the risk of collision. Hülkenberg, who was moving close to them, tried his best to avoid these 2 colliding cars, but it was not successful, as his car was also damaged after tagging one of these collided cars. That was the end of the race for Magnussen, Perez and Hülkenberg, and all 3 cars experienced heavy damages, which is unhealthy for team budgets. Apart from those 2 incidents, 2 Alpine teammates were also involved in a collision when Ocon tried to overtake Gasly, not leaving enough space, and it was the end of the race for Ocon. Ocon was later handed a 5-second time penalty for causing this collision. As his race was over, this time penalty was converted to a 5-place grid penalty for the next race in Canada. Race control made an extra effort to repair the barrier and prepare for the rest of this 1-lap long race. Because of the collision between Haas and Red Bull, Sainz received one more lifeline to restart the race as 3rd on the grid, as the collision had taken place before stopping the car by Sainz. The race restarted at 15:44 local time, with 76 laps remaining to go, and only 16 cars participated in the race restart. Prior to it, most of the drivers pitted their cars and switched to compounds with longer lifetimes, with the hope of completing the race on the same set of tyres. Once again, Leclerc secured the race lead. Piastri and Sainz were running behind him. On lap 10, Piastri was able to record the fastest lap of the race, reducing the gap with Leclerc down to 1 second. When the race progressed further, the gaps between the top 3 reduced to very close ones. When it was lap 23, the top 4 drivers who were running on hard compounds had a notable gap with Russell, who was running in 5th. Apart from that, one more train was observed at the back of the pack, which was led by Aston Martin driver Fernando Alonso. He held that train for 20 more laps and allowed his teammate Lance Stroll, who was running in P11, to take a fresher set of tyres on lap 44. This opened the opportunity for him to attack Pierre Gasly, who was running on old rubber. On lap 48, race leader Charles Leclerc asked how much faster he could go over the radio, and his engineer replied that he was not interested in giving an answer for that, making him frustrated. Anyhow, all the efforts of the Aston Martin team went in vain on lap 50, when Stroll clipped the barrier, causing a puncture in his left rear wheel. He quickly entered the pit lane once again, switching to a new set of soft compounds. On lap 51, Bottas launched a clever move on Logan Sargent by taking an insider path to improve his position up to P12. After pitting new softer compounds, Stroll launched some quick overtakes over Zhou and Sargent, but those efforts were not sufficient enough to recover the disadvantage that he created by clipping the barriers. Throughout the race, Norris wanted to take a fresher set of rubber to launch an attack on Sainz for a podium spot, but it was not possible, as he was not maintaining enough gap with Russell to hold the track position. Russell's tyre management was really good, and it helped him to stay away from the attack of the championship leader, Max Verstappen. In the later stage of the race, there was close competition between Piastri, Sainz, and Norris for the second spot of the race. However, no change to the order happened till they crossed the finish line. After 2 failed attempts to convert his pole position to a race victory, Leclerc was able to break that curse this year by becoming the winner of his home Grand Prix. The rest of the podium places went to Piastri and Sainz, making the championship battle tougher for Red Bull drivers. After fighting hard throughout the race, Lando Norris had to satisfy with a 4th place finish. Russell was in 5th spot after holding Verstappen in P6 throughout the race. The rest of the point-offering positions were occupied by Hamilton, Tsunoda, Albon and Gasly. This was the first time in the 2024 season that Albon and Gasly were able to record points. Once again, Red Bull was beaten by Ferrari and McLaren drivers, not allowing the Milton Keynes-based squad to dominate the season like in the previous 2 editions. This extreme competitiveness at the top is really good, as this is the nature of the championship that people love to see. Formula 1 is ready to race in Canada after a 2-week break, and the performance of these top teams in Canada will surely help to understand the flow of the 2024 season to a certain extent. Can the Red Bull team bounce back in Canada, creating a considerable performance gap over McLaren and Ferrari? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to get more exciting Formula 1 news. We'll see you in the next video, guys. Goodbye.